Welcome to the Work Podcast, brought to you by Open Assembly. I'm John Windsor, and today I'm with Cynthia Hansen. Cynthia is the head of the Adecco Group Foundation and Social Innovation at the Adecco Group, where she drives strategy, delivery, and impact. Prior to joining Adecco, she spent 9 years with the World Economic Forum, where she held a number of roles, including head of content strategy and head of chairman engagement, and the role of business in society. How are you doing today, Cynthia?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, John.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I mean, you and I have had some super interesting conversations, and you've had such a wealth of knowledge and experience in the space. And I'd just love for you to share with the audience today kind of your background. Maybe we start with that.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am with the Adecco Group Foundation, and I was hired about 3 years ago to set up that foundation. I actually come from a mix of experience from the US, the UK, and now Switzerland. And what I find is, having worked particularly across civil society and then the corporate sector, is that the roles that I find the most rewarding are the ones that really sit at the nexus of those. And so kind of working backwards, I was, as you said, at the World Economic Forum for 9 years in a bunch of different roles. Previous to that, I was a consultant for the nonprofit sector in the UK, working for a boutique firm there called Action Planning that serves the not-for-profit sector. And before that, I was a practitioner in the nonprofit sector in the US, running primarily public-private partnerships and cultural exchange programs. And so it's really exciting to actually look at what the red thread is through that. And a lot of it has been about building, scaling, and looking for ways to really create social impact. So I think that chimes really nicely with what you're doing at Open Assembly.
Thanks. No, I totally agree. I mean, I think one of the great things about, your perspective is this global perspective, and there's so much changing in, every aspect of work right now, right? From the legislative issues to the workers, workers' rights and how do we support workers, to how do companies use work in a new way and take friction out of their system. Let's talk a little bit about the foundation. Tell us what's going on there.
Sure. So the Adecco Group Foundation is relatively new. So we were only started in 2017. And unlike a lot of other foundations, we didn't start entirely from scratch. We actually were lucky to be seeded with a number of social value activities that had been grown up within the group and then were taken out of the group and put into the foundation as a way to create really a hub for all of the social value creation work that was happening within the group or under the umbrella of the group. The idea that if you put things together, then you can drive the synergies, you can create better impact, you can engage stakeholders more effectively. So it meant that we inherited things around two main topics, one being one of them being work readiness for underserved populations, and then the other one really around health and well-being. So we kind of stitched those two together. They're nicely complementary. The idea you get people ready to work, and then you make sure that you've got an environment that allows them to be holistically healthy and able to stay in work. However, what we found was, over the next couple of years, the portfolio really grew. We added more things. We added thought leadership. We also grew a social innovation lab. And a couple of years on, we found that the whole portfolio had maybe become a bit too big and a bit too diverse. So with the help and the drive of the new chairman coming in, we took the board through a really good strategic review of all the things in our toolbox and what we really wanted to do and where we felt we could add best value, and therefore how we wanted to refocus the foundation. And what we landed on was really two things. One, focus in on operating as the social innovation lab, because that's something that no one else is doing out of a corporate foundation, and where we thought we could really drive that model to add value. And then second, instead of doing multiple topics, really zoom in on that topic of employability and access to labor markets for underserved populations. So this is really the exciting piece and where we're going now. We're at this inflection point, and that this is where we think that we can really create something new.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of a social innovation lab. It's definitely needed. And you guys have so much knowledge and data on what's happening with work globally. So it's great to see that. So what's the most interesting thing you're working on right now?
Well, actually, we've had this methodology for running social innovation lab projects for the last couple of years. We built it up kind of on the fly with some of our existing projects. But what we didn't have were the two pieces to bookend it. And this is the exciting piece we're building now. So in terms of being able to identify who's really falling out of the workforce and what are the factors that are keeping them out, we needed to create a scanning mechanism. We needed a way to really bring to bear interesting data feeds and then expert insights to look at that data, unpack it, push and prod, and out of that come up with recommendations of who are the target audiences we should be looking at and what are the challenges that we should be solving. So that's a new piece we're developing now that's very exciting. And not only will it actually drive the pipeline of the social innovation projects, it will drive the research agenda of the foundation as well. And we'll be publishing on a regular basis the findings of that, what's coming out, who is falling out, who's being overlooked, who is not showing up according to traditional measurements. So one of the first groups we're looking at there is young people, but not kind of broadly young people. We're starting with the idea of NEAT, so that not in education, employment, or training, which is beyond young people. Lots of people can be NEAT, but kind of NEAT, and then looking at young people, and then within young people, looking at a smaller slice of the people who have finished compulsory education, but maybe not gone into training or gone into work. What's happening to them? Maybe what they're falling out. And then within those, looking at the ones who tend to fall below the poverty line. And then now, if we've got that as kind of our target population, then look at what are the things that are keeping them out of work. Is it the need to balance work and study? Is it motivation? Is it social norms? Is it pressure from the parents? Is it lack of access to role models? Really then starting to dig into what are the things that keep those young people kind of off the trajectory that will take them to work. So that's actually a cool new piece that we're building that then we'll be able to take into the lab piece and be able to build concrete solutions. That's awesome. Any early findings that you can share with us from the research? So with this one, we're going to come out with kind of our first piece of preliminary research probably in April. But again, what we're going to be able to point to is those young people who are falling out and the idea that probably they're between the ages of 15 and 19. So if you take the 15 to 19-year-old who's finished school but hasn't gone into education, further education, isn't in work, isn't actively looking for work, where does that kid show up? He or she doesn't show up in the school statistics, doesn't show up in the employment statistics, doesn't show up in the unemployment statistics either. So that's somebody who isn't being measured and therefore isn't being offered services or help or assistance or guidance. And so that's one of the key things that we're looking at first, because I think that's something that we haven't seen showing up in the radar. And so that's one of the first findings. And then what will come out that we're still working on is what are the factors that are keeping those young people out of work. No, I love that. I think that's the thing that always concerns me when we hear all these statistics about unemployment and employment and new kinds of employment, is that there's that kind of missing gap, right, of people that are kind of either taking themselves out of the system or just, been worn down so much that they're not in any system and aren't even categorized. It's really difficult. I'm glad you guys are doing that. When you think about that, like, is this a global study, or are you concentrating on a few different countries, or where are you on that? Like, is it, are we looking at sub-Saharan Africa as well as, North America and Europe and Russia? And so the mandate of the Adecco Group Foundation is global. And ultimately what we're looking at is global solutions. But in order to come up with global solutions, you need to pick a couple of countries to focus on that you think are indicative of the trends that you'll see across others. So right now we're looking at a handful of countries, a mix of Europe, Latin America, Asia, with the idea of picking probably 3 or 4 across those and choosing ones that where we have good data, where we also have a footprint and the ability to run pilots, but also where they are indicative enough of the region to say, if we can solve these issues for young people in that country, it's probably replicable to other countries in the region. And knowing that the local context is very, very different, what we don't want to get into is building very specific solutions for a local context that wouldn't scale. So we're going to look a bit broader than that and then see where it goes. But again, it's a social innovation lab. There are things that we don't know and won't know until we run the projects, but that's where we're headed.
No, I love that because so much research done these days is so great and it's awesome, but it just sits out there on the shelf, right? It's like great perspective. What are we going to do with it? And it's really, really great that you guys are taking the step to making, putting that into action and have actionable solutions. So it makes a lot of sense. Well, let's dig into the future of work. What are you seeing in the context of the latest disruption of COVID and the economic issues around COVID?
So one of the things we're seeing really prevalently is that COVID has actually exacerbated trends that were happening already. And one of the ones that we've really seen is that people who were already in precarious situations or already kind of at the bottom of the employment chain are the ones who are suffering most. And so our own research, and then certainly research by others, has shown that women have been disproportionately impacted, that people of color as well, that young people as well. And one of the things that we've seen across those is that just proportionately, those folks tend to be represented in lower paid jobs, in part-time or temporary jobs as well. And so those are the kinds of positions that tend to be cut first. And so this is why I think we're seeing that kind of, disproportionate impact on people who are already in somewhat underserved populations. We've had an interesting conversation going actually with a group of quite diverse women who are all looking at this angle of women coming back into the workforce from different perspectives. And what we're seeing across all of them is that COVID has really ramped up this issue of women who have stepped out of the workforce wanting to get back in and either struggling to get back in because the job market is tight and because they may not be as competitive as their peers who are currently in the job market. And then at the other end of the spectrum, more women who are stepping out of the job market because of COVID, because of issues around schooling or around childcare, pure financial reasons as well. Can I actually net more for my family by staying home and saving the childcare costs? Or there's also another issue of what is choice? Because there is this often a sense that, women choose to step out of the workforce, but that overlooks a lot of these other factors, which may point to the fact that it may not actually be a choice, it may be a necessity.
Right. No, I think I've seen that locally. I mean, we have seen that locally as well, right? It's a really difficult situation when families are trying to make ends meet, but then you get kids at home, young kids at home that are trying to, get through school and all the needs they have. So Indeed. it's really made, I feel like one of the things that COVID's really done is exposed a lot of fragility, not just in the workplace, but also in society in general. And how are we going to fix those? Like, how do we become more resilient and what do we need to do that? Let's take a look at open talent. Where do you see that fitting into the ecosystem of talent these days for companies?
So we've been looking both at the Adecco Group and the Adecco Group Foundation at basically the mega trends around how the workforce is changing and how companies and employers of all sorts need to be more agile and to look not just at traditional roles and traditional kinds of contracts, but actually to look at a dynamic mix, to be more flexible, to be more resilient, to look at what are the needs that I have today, what are the needs that I'm going to have tomorrow, and what kind of mix of permanent, temporary, high-skilled, low-skilled, different kinds of talent, freelancers might I want to employ in order to meet my objectives. And I think what we're seeing is actually a more open attitude toward that mix. And this is what I think opens the door nicely for the open talent conversation. But another piece that we're looking at, again, both in the Adecco Group Foundation and in the group, is what's the social safety net and the social inclusion piece that goes with that. And so this whole piece around the new social contract is, I think, really important. And what should be the role of employers in providing sustainable livelihoods and making sure that people are not exploited. And then on the flip side, what should be the expectations of the employee of the kind of employer I want to join? What would I expect the employer to do in terms of taking care of me as a whole person, valuing me, making sure that I not only have the basics of a social safety net, but also that I have a sustainable livelihood and that I have a means of advancing, that I have a career path. And so I think this is one of the things you're really seeing be different is not only you have this kind of this mosaic and a more dynamic mix, but also the idea of a career path, and that the career path may actually involve multiple employers. So that it combines this idea of career pathing with lifelong learning, that you're now getting a model of lifelong employability. So I might start here in this particular profession or this particular industry, and then I skill and I reskill and I move into something else and maybe a different employer. But that employer is helping me to upskill, not because they want to keep me forever, but because they see that I contribute to the labor pool. And so it may be that I upskill, and then some years later, then I leave and I go to something else. And I think really good employers are now not seeing that as a loss, but rather as a contribution to my livelihood and my sustainability, but also to the global workforce. So I think you're starting to see a shift in that direction, but I think it will take quite a long time.
Yeah, no, I think that's really awesome. That's a great perspective, and I think that the social safety net is a piece of the puzzle that's really, really hard to solve. Right? It's just really hard to innovate in, and takes a lot of not only effort by companies and governments and workers themselves to kind of get figure that out, but it's a collective thing. Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the idea of employability and lifelong learning, and I talked to a CEO of a startup here in Boulder who's created a system and is connected with a few clients to be able to create an ecosystem of employment, so that, let's just say you've got, fast casual dining, and you've got, a bunch of different, or fast food in the US. If you've got somebody at McDonald's that, is moving up and really smart and doing great, and there's no position for management, can an Arby's, be in that ecosystem? And if Arby's has a gap there, can they jump across to another company? And there are these, I love this idea. I mean, one of the projects that we worked on at Open Assembly was with WEF on this idea of creating ecosystems. And I think that, so many of the problems today in the world are so big that you can't do it alone as a company. You've got to create this ecosystem to solve these bigger problems. And for me, I agree with you. I think that's one of the solutions, is that it's incumbent on companies to think beyond just their own P&L, but the employment development, because even if that person leaves, if you have a system, there's a nice, there's less friction in the system, and it creates more flow that gives you more opportunities to get things from the outside. And that includes open talent for sure.
Absolutely. So one of the pieces that at the Adecco Group Foundation we're involved with is something called HR Valley, which is exactly that ecosystem approach. And this is also ancillarily tied in with the World Economic Forum. So we started this, we actually launched it in Davos a year ago, and started it up with the University of Zurich and BCG and Boston Consulting Group. Right. And the idea is to really create this ecosystem approach around HR or really around talent and the future of work. And the idea is to bring in the really rigorous research piece, which is really housed in the university, and then marry that with the application, which is how do you take the research and apply it to the way companies behave, what they lack in terms of data, what information they need in order to make good decision making, how that how that impacts how they evolve their business models as well. It's a whole practical application piece. And then how do you teach that? And how do you use the preparation of not only HR professionals, but business professionals in general to actually think about talent and think about people differently? And how do you prepare them to take on that new kind of role? How do you prepare them to take those new models into their companies? And how do you do that through traditional education modes like the undergraduate and graduate curricula, but then how do you also take it out to practitioners and do this through executive education? And then there's a last piece that's really exciting as well, which is around HR tech. So who are the startups who are really pioneering the kinds of technology solutions that you might need in order to drive those new business models? And so that whole ecosystem approach, I think, as you said, is absolutely key to making this work. And so we're excited to be part of growing that one.
That's awesome. Yeah, you should check out Liz Altman at MIT. Just published a paper. I don't know if you saw it, but it's the future of work is workforce ecosystem. And
Oh, no, I
it's
haven't seen that.
yeah, it's Sloan. I'll make sure I send it to you for sure.
Great.
But it's a really good article. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think this ecosystem approach is really great, and really important to think about. And, obviously people are going to be coming in and out of full-time employment and open talent opportunities. And some people are going to want to be micro entrepreneurs, but don't have that safety net and need to build that safety net. And so lots of things to solve. I heard, we had a Clubhouse conversation about the future of work last week. It was super fun. It was the first time we had done that. You'll have to join one of them. It's the last Thursday of the month, I think, at 10 o'clock Mountain Time. But one of the things that one of the CEOs of the platforms, Ryan Gill from Communo, talked about was, I guess there's a new platform. I can't remember the name of it, but essentially they're set up to pay freelance workers by the second. So when it's connected into the platform, when you connect and you hit your timer to start working on a project, then it actually, not only does it count your time, but it actually pays you immediately. There's no friction in getting paid for for the project or for the work that you're doing. And I think that's really, really wonderful. Obviously, I can see in the traditional employment model it being so disruptive because it disrupts the whole, payroll side of the business. Unemploys a bunch of people with technology. So I have a feeling it's going to be a long time to implement, but I think you'll see that bubble up from smaller companies and you'll see that bubble up from freelance platforms for sure. But I love these kind of new models that are just taking lots of friction out of the system, right? What do you see as the future of open talent?
So I think the future of open talent is that it becomes one piece of that puzzle, one piece of the mosaic. And I think right now it's not mainstreamed, but I think that's where it's going. So I think what you'll find is that companies will start to shift their mix. So maybe a smaller percentage will be traditional long time or permanent contracts. I think probably a smaller proportion will be like traditional contracting through agencies, through kind of the mass piece. And then the open talent piece will actually start to grow, because it's the piece, I think, that provides the most flexibility and the most resilience. And so providing that it does become mainstreamed and is seen as part of that mosaic, and that there's the proper safety net underneath it, which I think platforms actually could provide, then I think that's where it will go. And that's where it should go. I think there are pitfalls that could happen as well if it becomes seen as exploitative, or if it becomes seen as too transactional. So if you go back to that idea of paying people by the second, if that morphs into people taking much longer than is needed to actually do a task, then it starts to undermine the purpose of making that light and flexible model.
For sure.
And so I'm sure everybody is looking at these issues, but I think it has immense potential to become part of that mosaic. But I think it's going to have to be grown carefully. And I think there's probably a regulation aspect to that as well, because if it's seen as the Wild West, then it's open to exploitation. If it's overregulated, then you kill that flexibility and what's wonderful about open talent. So I think that's going to be a not an easy task, and something that's going to take that ecosystem approach to make sure that the regulators are part of it, that the workers are part of it, the platforms are part of it. And so this is where I think something like what you're doing is really crucial to finding the right solutions.
Thanks. No, we really appreciate that. I mean, it is interesting, right? Like one of the things that I found really fascinating when California was, contemplating the AB5 and all those, and all the legislation that's happened, is that, I think some legislators forget that, especially in California, there's been a robust open talent marketplace called Hollywood for a long, long time. And in that creative business, it's not only the people that work in the business, they've figured out a way to economically align everybody and a way to create social safety nets through things like SAG. But yet they've also, like have this whole ecosystem of freelancers that are freelance screenwriters that are also authors, and they might be, they might write other things besides, books and screenplays. And so it seems like that's, to me, really interesting, because there was a lot of folks that have lived in that system and figured out that system to say, wait a second, I don't want to be employed by anybody. I've got this thing going. I feel really good about it. My sense also is that, that for those people that have the courage, and I think more and more people will because of just economic situation, that they're micro entrepreneurs, right? They figure it out. I mean, I heard this amazing story the other day from Barry Matthews at Resource in the UK, and he's doing a bunch of ethnographies across the world on, people, because he's trying to really find new stories. We have so many stories in every marketplace, especially open talent, and it's time for some new stories. And he talked to a woman who was a mid-level accounting person or accountant inside an accounting firm that was making about $3,500 a month, a single mom with 2 kids. And when COVID started, and she's in Portland, Oregon, when COVID started, she got laid off. Then she got COVID, and she was in a really desperate strait financially. She went onto a platform, and 8 months later, she has 12 clients, and she's making $26,000 a month, sitting at home, being with her kids. And that transformational, effort of like saying, okay, I got to do something on my own. I got to be a micro entrepreneur. All of a sudden, she's almost like 8 times her revenue in 8 months. And I think there's that possibility, right? Because there's this ecosystem of other small companies that can't afford accounting firms, but could afford her. And so all of a sudden these disruptions are, if you can take advantage of them, if you can figure out how to pivot yourself or pivot your company, there's a lot of opportunity. I also think, I agree with you, and I would love your reaction to this, but when we talk to a lot of the members that are on the corporate side of things, one of the things they always talk about is, any disruption, especially this disruption and the uncertainty that comes with this disruption and the volatility with the disruption, is that they feel like, digital transformation, they've had to double down on digital. I can't say it. Sorry. They have to double down on digital transformation. So that's meant that in order to do that, they've had to actually trying to transfer a lot of fixed costs to variable costs. They're saying that we don't know what the future is going to be. We can't make these long-term commitments. So we've got to be very product and project oriented. We've got to say, okay, this is a project. What team are we going to assemble? How do we make it super light and fast? How do we make a variable cost? And then we have to get people to kind of go off and do the next thing. But we've got to be very focused on tasks instead of talent in the past, right? It was nice to say, I have this feeling that I want to, let's just take for instance, like I need to develop a strategy around AI. And so I think what I'll do is find the right, leader for that, and they'll hire the right team, and they'll come up with the right strategy. And then you're a year down the road and the world's changed. Exactly. Right? Instead of saying, I need to find the right consultant to do this, and it needs to be done in 3 weeks. And then I need to figure out, what are the tasks to be done? Who are the best people to do those tasks? Maybe it's an internal employee. Maybe it's a critical hire. Maybe it's a, freelance consultant that can help out and build those teams, like you said, in a very much of a tapestry kind of way. So
I think that the complementary piece to that is the skills that the employee or the freelancer, or, the person, the member of that team needs in order to fulfill that. And this is one of the things that we've seen go hand in hand with that digital transformation and the digital investments that companies are making, is that they've got to have the people skilled up to work with that technology. And so from the high skill to the low skill, we're seeing that there is a huge premium being put on all kinds of digital skills. So out of the Adecco Group Foundation in the U.S., because we have a U.S. version of us as well, they are running an academy hand in hand with Penn Foster, who's an online community college organization, right? And they're offering an array of different courses, and what they're finding is that the courses on very basic digital skills are the ones that are highest in demand. So it's how to use Microsoft Office, how to do Excel spreadsheets, and things like that, because people are seeing that they will not advance without those skills. And so you're seeing that, at that level, but then you're also seeing it in places like General Assembly as well. People are looking to make career changes. They're looking for higher level, say, coding skills or digital marketing skills. It's that mirror as well. So as companies are making that pivot, the workforce is having to pivot as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the things that I find really interesting, I read a study last year that said that, the average, pre-COVID, obviously, and I'm sure it's changed, but the average employer gave the average employee 0.03% of their salary to do job-specific training. That it was like super specific, not overall training, but just job-specific skill training. Whereas what we found in studies that we've done, that the average freelancer spends 15% of their time upskilling themselves. So this big diversity, right? And I would say when you take the employment out of it, right? When you say, just let's talk about the most skilled employee, would you rather have somebody that's spending 15% of their time learning or 0.03% of their time learning? In my mind, then there's no choice, right? And so I think that's one issue. My other thing is I'm really interested in Steve Rader that I mentioned to you earlier from NASA, and I've been talking a lot about the issue of why is it that upskilling and work are so, or like learning and work are so pulled apart, right? I mean, the way it works now, right, is you kind of go through a year, you get the annual review, they say, here's what you did well, here's what you need to improve. Then you have to like take it on yourself to go find some places to reskill. Or during that year, you might say, I feel like I'm falling behind in this, so I'm going to have to go do that myself, right? So a lot of that has to happen very organically. And I guess, what Steve and I've envisioned as a future, especially on the open talent side of things, is you, Cynthia, do a consulting project on an open talent platform. The client immediately after the project's done gives you a review, might say, here are 10 metrics. You're awesome at 5, you're good at 3, 2 you have to improve on. But the platform then will serve upskilling opportunities to you to get certified in those 2 areas. You can do those over a week. And then that platform would notify the employer saying, hey, Cynthia, was really motivated and got out and she's certified in these 2 areas that you felt that she was short on. So that work and upskilling become this hand in hand, ongoing flywheel, right? Like work, upskilling, new projects, so that everybody's kind of moving really, really quickly into the future instead of waiting around saying, I didn't win that job. I guess I have to have some more, knowledge about Adobe Spark or another new program where I don't know how to do creative work on. So I don't know if you've seen any examples of that, more tying closely work and learning.
So there are a couple of things. One is the World Economic Forum just brought out their new Skills Taxonomy, which I think is really interesting because what they did was basically create a meta taxonomy across all of the ones that exist, and that has been needed for a really long time. And I think that goes hand in hand with that sea change you're seeing of moving away from jobs and job descriptions and even kind of skills to actually buckets of skills related to tasks. And so I think that is part of, you need to shift the mind or the framework away from, I have this job with this description, so therefore I need these 10 things from that person, rather than this is what I'm trying to accomplish. These are the skills and competencies that I need. I can pull them from multiple people, from multiple places, put them together, accomplish that task or that project, then disperse those people, let them go out and build more skills, and then bring them together again. So this is where you're seeing things like that in models like Modus, which is actually one of the subsidiaries under the Adecco Group, which is basically consulting that's all, task and project based. And you find out what the client needs, you bring together the right team of people across engineering and IT, you have them do that task. They then go back into our pool, they get upskilled, reskilled, assessed, they get sent out to other clients, other projects, they do their tasks, they learn, they upskill there, they go back into the pool, they get retrained. So again, awesome. you have this model of the learning is part of your job, and the learning is part of making you more and more employable and more valuable. So you get rid of that decoupling you were talking about of upskilling and learning and work are all separate. They're actually all the same.
No, I love that. That's really cool. So what do organizations need to do to adopt these new alternative talent models? I mean, it feels like, there's a lot of organizational innovation that needs to happen and transformation that needs to happen to get ready for this new world of employment.
So I think there are several things they need to do. They need to shift the way they're looking at people and talent and skills. That goes back to the job descriptions versus, say, skill descriptions piece. And then once they've got a clearer sense of that, they need to map that against what they're trying to achieve, the strategy of the company, where your positioning is, what you want to do and be in the future. And then you need to figure out, okay, if this is where we're going, what's your theory of change? What do we need in order to get there? And people are one piece of that. So if you then have better defined the kinds of skills and competencies and propensities that you need, then you figure out how to go and get it. And then that goes back to your mosaic. So there might be some things for which permanent contracts are good or where freelancers are good, so, but you need to be flexible, but I think start with, what are you trying to achieve?
Yep. Great. What's on your roadmap? What is the most interesting thing you're coming up with right now, or it's coming up for you? Let me restate that so I get it correct. What's the most interesting thing that's coming up for you?
So I think what's most interesting coming up for us is, how do you marry that research, the innovation and building things, and then getting it out into the market? Because all of those things right now tend to exist in isolation. You do research for the sake of research. And then, as you said, research sits on the shelf. Right. Or you do innovation and problem solving and product development, but it's not informed by the research of what's going on in the world. Or you do this great product development, but you haven't actually seen where it would go in the market. And so this is one of those struggles of a lot of entrepreneurs as well. If you don't see where you fit in the market, you don't see what your sweet spot is. And so if we can bridge that, having great ideas and building them out to actually getting them out to the people who need it, then we're completing that cycle. So it's that holistic view and how one piece feeds the other. That's the most exciting thing I'm seeing right now.
That's cool. So if you had a crystal ball, and what would the world look like in 5 to 10 years?
I think in 5 to 10 years, there will be much more of a mosaic. I think there will be more a blurring of boundaries between academia and civil society and the business sector, I think, and government as well. So I think you're going to see more collaboration, to the point where actually multi-stakeholder collaboration will be embedded in everything. I'm not sure 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe a little longer, but it's the way the world is going. And so eventually that will be just the way everybody operates, rather than being something that is special, or you need a consultant to come in and tell you how to do it, or we need to make this massive change within our organization. It will just be the way the world works.
That's awesome. I hope so too, for sure. Cynthia, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. I just love your perspective, and you've just got such a breadth of knowledge and insight from such a great, 100,000 foot level, but also digging deep into so many parts of these ecosystems. So I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure.